Hello and welcome to EU Decoded, a podcast by the EPP Group in the European Parliament. My name is Kitty Liddon and I am your host, and today we are going to cover the International Women's Day 2026. Together we'll be addressing gender equality and more specifically asking, why are we still talking about this? Joining me today are Member of the European Parliament Liesbet Sommen, welcome, and Member of the European Parliament Maria Walsh, welcome. Now let's take a look at the successful and concrete steps that Europe has taken towards gender equality, as well as the positive developments that are already in motion. And we'll start where power often begins, economic independence. Across Europe, women are still earning about 12% less per hour than men, not because of one single rule, but because of a web of factors: unequal care responsibilities, career interruptions, slower promotions, and fewer leadership roles. To tackle this, the EU has passed 3 major laws in recent years: the EPP-led Work-Life Balance Directive in 2019, the Women on Boards Directive in 2022, which was also an EPP initiative, and the Pay Transparency Directive in 2023. Together, they aim to change how work is structured, how salaries are set, and who sits at the decision-making tables. And this year, a report on closing the gender pay and pension gaps, another EPP priority, was voted in the European Parliament's Gender Equality and Social Affairs Committees. Mrs. Sommen, how will these laws affect people's daily lives? And are we already seeing changes?
Well, it might be still a little bit too early to speak about concrete impacts on lives because, of course, we make EU laws, but then they have to be transposed into national legislation. And for most cases that you've mentioned, pay transparency, women on boards, it's still a little bit too early. Member states still have the time to implement it. But if we talk about the Work-Life Balance Directive, on the contrary, I think it has changed people's lives dramatically. So what we've foreseen is paternity leave, parental leave, care leave, flexible working environments, and that is so crucial. And even in member states like my own, Belgium, which already did a good job on some of these aspects, it has created a debate because it came from Europe, but the debate was there also in Belgium. And we went from 10 days paternity leave to 20 days, which makes such a huge difference when you give birth. The mother needs support from the father, and if he can be there for the double of the initial amount of days, that makes a real difference, and I think women absolutely appreciate this. So we really take the lead in Europe to make it easier for women and the men in their daily lives, and I really support this policy.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mrs. Walsh, what do you think is still lacking in policies to achieve true equality?
Yeah, picking up from Liesbet's piece around the transposition, I think that's probably one of the more difficult things. So I was really grateful. I was the EPP negotiator for the Pay Transparency Directive, and to Liesbet's point, we in Ireland, in my own member state, will see that be transposed this summer. But I remember in the 2024 elections having really hard conversations with women in business, women working from home, because care, I think my colleague here is incredible hard working on highlighting the unpaid care work that we have, both be it kids or elderly community members in our families, and then what often happened over that election period was, well, what about this? What about that? What about, and some issues are national. So our childcare system in Ireland is quite a national issue. But where we could get better at, looking at the likes of work-life balance, or even women on boards, or even the pay transparency, is what can we move in tandem with? So Belgium is fantastic at really leading us ahead on a better working conditions. Ireland so, but there's other member states that we absolutely need to bring up that par. So regardless of whether you live, work, love, or study anywhere across the 27 member states, your working conditions, your access to what we say family relief supports is still with you regardless of the type of couple you are, whether you're an individual or in a different type of partnership that we might have had when Ireland joined in 1973. To your point around, I always like to say it, particularly in these conversations, and Ireland comes into presidency later this summer in July. And I'm delighted pay transparency is right before that, because I think a huge conversation in Europe needs to happen is, what are 51% of the population saying about the EU, about our legislation, and how we can ultimately make sure their voices are heard. Because to my point, we don't have enough of them elected. We've dropped a percentage from the last election as female representation here in Parliament. But when we joined in 1973 as a country, we saw the removal of the marriage bar. And for women of that generation, you know, whether you wanted to or not, working in public or private, if you were about to get married, you had to leave your full-time or part-time public or private jobs. And the issue what Liesbet and I are still fixing some 50 odd years on is access to pensions and access to better pay. And you do that with the 3 legislative files that we talked about, but we still have a long way to go to your introduction of, I think women stop getting paid in many sectors based off minimum wage or equal pay to men in and around November time. And that's not good enough in 2026.
No.
Yeah, and maybe if we talk about the Women on Boards Directive, the member states have time until mid this year to transpose it into national legislation. So we can see some difference there. What we actually saw in Belgium, we already had a law starting in 2011, and it had a huge impact. So now in Belgium, 1 out of 3 members of boards are women. So that is a huge difference if you compare it to the situation before. But if you ask us where are still things lacking, what we need to improve, we see that this is not being seen on the management level, on the executive level. So we see that only 3% of CEOs of companies are women. And that is such a waste of talent. How is it even possible in a modern economy, in European context, that we only have 3% of CEOs being women? I think now that we have this legislation with the women on board, we need to take next steps in seeing how we can improve also on the executive level. The other sex, let's say, not only women, but also men, being put in their talent and really use their strength and the competences that they have to improve our economy and competitiveness, which we really need in Europe.
Absolutely. Economic independence is just vital.
Well, it's choice, right?
Yes.
If you're equally paid, and that was probably one of the biggest kickbacks around the Pay Transparency Directive, like, well, do we really need it? Do employers need the administrative burden? But I always say, what we don't know, we don't know. And the data set is incredibly important because we need to then start looking at legislation that perhaps positively discriminates towards women in order to find that balance. I could talk at length about the agriculture sector. I mean, only 2 member states, Ireland and Spain, ring-fence funding around the last cap to ensure that women were seen and recognised in the farm system. And then what we have to do now is, to Liesbet's point, is build on that now so that women actually see that money in their pocket in order to do and make a choice for themselves and their families.
Absolutely. There's another subject that we need to cover today, which is safety, which is fundamental. Still in Europe, around 1 in 3 women have experienced physical and sexual violence. And in May 2024, the EU adopted its first ever directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence. For the first time, there are EU-wide minimum standards on criminalisation, victim protection and support services. So, Ms. Walsh, what makes this 2024 directive so significant, and what will it actually change?
Yeah, listen, I think monumental, and I got to give credit to my Irish colleague Frances Fitzgerald, former MEP and former Deputy Prime Minister in Ireland, who really, along with colleagues in last mandate, paved the way on this. Not everything was included, and I know this mandate colleagues are really working on to make those change. But this was monumental in the sense of we now have a standard, a baseline right across the 27 member states. And also the enlargement countries when they come into the EU. And I think that often gets missed in the conversation too. But that standard baseline is incredibly important. It makes a very clear distinction. Violence against women will not be tolerated. We're dealing with historical issues on a daily basis across the world. against violence against women. And where we need to scale and grow on that is the speed of what technology is moving at. And of course, I could talk at length about deepfakes, so AI-generated content.
We are going to move
Perfect
to
on
that,
that.
in a little while.
So hold up, yeah.
If you don't mind, because I just wanted to know from Mrs. Sommen, this directive, how do we ensure that it does deliver across all member states?
Well, of course, transposition into national legislation is key. That remains to be clear. Member states have the time until 2027. So some member states are really active trying to implement them. Others are still just evaluating and trying to reach minimum standards. So there is, like Maria said, a big difference between member states. But as Maria also highlighted, I think even though this directive was a huge step in the right direction, some things are still missing in it as well. If we talk about safety, to start with a binding and uniform definition of rape based on consent. If this is not in there, this is a huge mistake. We've seen in Belgium that we have now this type of definition. We also have it in France, which used to be a very difficult country on this topic. And why has it changed? Because women were murdered and raped. In Belgium, we had the case of a very young woman being murdered and raped. In France, we had the Pellicot case. And after this, legislation on the national level changed. We need to talk about this on the European level because this is also a cross-border problem. If you want police and judicial systems to cooperate across borders, they need to have the same standard package of legislation. But it is such a disgrace, actually, that first women have to be raped or murdered before something is moving in the right direction. And consent is such an incredibly key issue in this regard. Yes means yes, and the absence of a no does not imply a yes. And we see that these gender stereotypes have sometimes been transferred from one generation to another. And we really need to teach our youngsters what consent actually means. We need to talk about what is a relationship, what are the expectations that you can have within a marriage or a relationship. These are crucial issues, and this is about gender stereotypes that we really have to beat. So this is really a societal issue. And there are more other things. I think we will talk about it later also, about online sexual violence that is still missing in the directive. So I still think we still have some work to do there.
Absolutely. Let's talk digital. Oh, did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to add to Liesbet's point. You know, we currently have in the legislation, and I should have alluded to it earlier, we do have the training of law enforcement and judiciary. That's really important, but I can tell you in my own member state it's still lacking. And it's like any interpretation, there's grey areas. And ultimately, the victim of that grey area is predominantly and disproportionately impacting women and young girls. And I know, as we said, we'll get onto the online space, but again, always a victim. It's like a political game of whack-a-mole. And that 51% of our population are not seen and heard and ultimately believed. And that's... you know, when I speak to any victim of sexual violence, be it online or offline, it's not good enough that they're not believed or that our judicial system is not keeping them protected in a holistic way. So better access to supports, talk therapies that are represented, the lived experience of what they're going through, financial supports should they need it in terms of having legal representation that actually is understanding of the practicalities of what they've been through. And if we don't have, at a national level, to Liesbet's point in terms of the consent-based rape in this mandate, if we don't deliver that, we are absolutely doing a disservice to women. It should have been in the last mandate. Some member states blocked it, and now we have time to correct that path along with the Victims' Right Directive. That's incredibly important, and any other directive that we need to make sure women are protected and seen, and that anybody who interacts with a person who experienced any form of violence yesterday or even generations ago, that they're seeing the same level of care and support that they're deserving of. And to Liesbet's point, it's not about just teaching one gender. It's about we understand as women our body autonomy, and we have the supports in place to do that. And then our male counterparts also understand that should you break the law, should you break the trust of a person, then there has to be some form of punishment that faces the crime adequately. And when you take that trust from a woman, like I said, we could be talking at length about this one, because there's sadly enough victims out there to that carries our work in here.
Thank you. It's a big subject. And now let's talk digital. Equality is no longer built solely in the workplace or at home. It is increasingly shaped online. Harassment can go viral in seconds. Intimate images can be fabricated using AI. Algorithms can filter job applications or determine access to credit. The 2024 Violence Against Women Directive that we were just talking about also includes provisions addressing certain forms of cyber violence. And then there's the AI Act, which entered in force in August 2024, which sets safeguards for high-risk AI systems. Ms. Walsh, how serious a threat to gender equality are digital violence and algorithmic bias? And are existing EU laws, I think you've covered this a little bit already, including the AI Act, are these strong enough to keep pace with technological change?
Oh yeah, I mean, buckle down, because we're going to be here for a while on this one. I mean, effectively, we have legislation now that, sadly, we're not moving to the pace of which technology is developing. And in some ways, you can't place blame on legislators in this House that we're moving on this. Transposition period is an issue, and equally, technology at that pace is just skyrocketing around us. And as an Irish MEP, considering we house so many of the social media platforms for Europe, I take very strong opinions to this, because for me, there's a couple of, back to the grey area. Right now, you could create a deepfake in under 25 minutes. The likes of Notify apps can come across your screens. They're encouraging you to create deepfakes for free, and again, disproportionately impacting women. So an excess of 90% of deepfakes are pornographic. Close to 99% are the victims are women and young girls. And I get, on a weekly basis, parents, grandparents, teachers reaching out to me, and I'm sure other colleagues do too, that their young person, their young teenager in secondary school or in high school in Ireland has had a deepfake be shared in our school. And the sad thing is, once it's out there, it is incredibly difficult. We know that from our jobs. And I always say we're very fortunate, because we have this big institution to mind us in some ways. Not necessarily in terms of our mental health in the best case, but we have teams to mind us. We can lean into our legal system if we need to. And as I just couldn't imagine being a 14, 15-year-old girl in a school in Mayo and have this deepfake go around and trying to convince, and we have this term, once you're explaining, you're losing, sometimes in politics. I couldn't imagine being that individual and saying, this is not me, and people not believing. And there's her integrity, her credibility, her academic or professional standing diminished right before our eyes. And the issue is, to your point, the grey area. So in Ireland, we have this national legislation called Coco's Law, which was designed and created after a loss of life. Nicole Coco Fox and her mum Jackie does an amazing body of work to try and bring this across Europe. EPP invited her into Parliament last mandate to share her story, but that's a national law. We're trying to get it across Europe, but that only criminalises those who disseminate the information of a deepfake or violence. It doesn't impact the perpetrator enough. And I think that's where the likes of AI Act, DSA, DMA, and even gender-based violence legislation, we're just missing out on the person who's creating it, or the platform who's disseminating it. Absolutely. Or there's just too many grey areas at the speed of which technology is moving to the impact that it's having on women and young girls.
And actually bouncing off that, Ms. Sommen, this is a very big question, but who ultimately bears responsibility in this digital space? Is it the platforms, developers, regulators, or is it the member states?
Yes, a very good question. I think maybe to start with, what the directive of 2024 did very well is recognizing that online and offline sexual violence is one single continuum. In Belgium we had, for instance, a very, very unfortunate case of a young girl of 14 years old being raped by a group of young men. Images were being taken and were put on the internet. And she sadly didn't see any other way out but to take her own life because of the online sharing of these images. So that is incredibly touching, that this problem can still occur. And when Maria talks about the fact that the directive is not up to speed with all of the new technology, the new apps, the deep nudes and everything, that is a true problem. But what I really think is good that we do right now as European Union with the Commission is to target the platforms. For instance, we have this inquiry right now against Musk's ex-AI bot Grok, of course, who creates also those deep nudes. And I think that is what we should keep on doing. We should speed up the pace. But that is where we have to be very strict. And that is where we have to show that the European Union has its values and that it will stick to it. I think that is absolutely essential. And if you ask me who is responsible, of course those platforms are responsible. They make a huge amount of money on our content, our creativity, our intellectual property, without often asking if they can. It is their business model. They design the architecture. They have to make sure that algorithms are safe, that safety is guaranteed. So they are, of course, absolutely responsible. On the other hand, the one who is perpetrating, the one who is setting criminal behavior online, whether it is offline or online, it is still criminal behavior. So also the one that does that has to face the consequences, of course. The member states, in my regard, we are facing here platforms that are internationally organized. I think it is really good and really crucial that this is a European topic. I think this is really where Europe has to play its role. I don't think we can really expect this from a single member state, especially the smaller ones, to face these platforms who are internationally based alone. So I think this is really where Europe needs to step up. And this is also in this international context, this geopolitical context of today, with Trump having a total different opinion, having announced yesterday a website where deep nudes, deep fake, hate speech, discrimination and everything can still be seen. You can avoid our European laws by using that website. I think here Europe has to play a role in saying, this is too far. Yeah. You are crossing red lines and you will face the consequences.
But of course, it's not always simple because the reality across Europe is not always uniform. In some member states, reproductive health has faced restrictions, funding for equality bodies has been questioned, public debates around gender policies have become increasingly polarized. The gender equality strategy of 2020 to 2025 was the first of its kind and laid the foundation for many of the reforms that we've discussed. And now there's a new strategy for 2026 to 2030. But what tools does the EU have when national standards move backwards?
I mean, I think institutions need to find teeth, ourselves included. I think we often get bogged down here on access to sexual reproductive health or access to, I would call women's healthcare, which is includes abortion services. But for me, it's so much further than that. That's a choice of a female should they wish to do so. But let's talk about the many other things that are going on for women that are impacting women and young girls. And the gender strategy, when we talk about what needs to happen, and to the point around teeth, we need an actual infringement procedure, be it breakage of rule of law, the delay politically on transposition of law. I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see some member states actually roll back even on the Pay Transparency Directive. And again, back to the point I made, like, what we don't know, we don't know. And if we start removing the likes of EU funding, and we're in the discussions for EU funds now, if we start removing EU funds for NGOs or CSOs that are dedicated to equality from the grassroots, then we as Europeans, particularly as legislators here in the three institutions, are absolutely losing our grasp of why we get up in the morning and fight for a better, stronger, more competitive Europe. Because if we start removing the voice of women in our grassroots, in our legislation, if we start making political decisions, then we're repeating history from years gone by, and that's not good enough. And this is why these type of conversations super important. If women or men, our allies, we need them, are watching this, and you're seeing your member state or national or local politician scale back, then like we need to know about that, and we need to be able to work with colleagues to find a unified voice. The penalties for non-compliance needs to come in. We need to make sure there's ring-fence funding in the next multi-financial framework for those organisations, and we need to start educating people on what actually means to be a woman and a young girl online and offline now, versus having this assumption that you know, what we see we don't understand. I mean, there's enough data out there, we're just not utilising it to the space. And it comes back to the woman's voice. I mean, we're just not hearing her to the extent she should be heard. And I know colleagues like Liesbet and I want to change that. That's why we ran, I think it's fair enough to say.
Ms. Sommen, would you like to add anything to what Ms. Walsh has just been speaking about?
No, like Maria said, I think we could use the rule of law toolbox, like has been done against Hungary, because we must be honest, even the EU, with its new set of laws, which has been a historic step into the right direction, with new directives having brought up, even the EU has still 50 years to reach true gender equality. But sadly, if we compare this to Hungary, Hungary would need 660 more years to reach true gender equality. I mean, the rule of law and the respect for it in Hungary is absolutely a problem with Orbán. And we hope from EPP side to be changing this very soon after the elections. So I think the rule of law toolbox is absolutely crucial there. And if we talk about the next gender equality strategy, I think we should really focus on femicide. Femicide, we see that we lack actually, Maria has mentioned numerous times, there is data about femicide. We lack actually data. We don't really know when it occurs, how often it occurs, why it occurs. We need more research on this, but of course also to act on it. There are NGOs who estimate that it occurs in Belgium once in 2 weeks. That is a lot. And this is not only, of course, a threat to real safety of women, but also it creates an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty amongst women and their families. Women don't dare to go out in the evening alone, change their clothes before they go out, walk around in the streets with their phone and their keys in their hands. Parents don't dare to say to their daughters that they can come home alone after a party. And this is really a huge societal problem. And by tackling femicide, I think we can already do something about it. So that to me is a real priority for the next coming years.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your insights. Unfortunately, it's all we have time for today. But I'm very grateful to you both for your contributions. Thank you
so much.
MEP Maria Walsh and MEP Liesbet Sommen. The work continues.
Absolutely.
And that's it for this episode of EU Decoded. Be sure to follow the EPP Group on social media, stay informed and stay involved. Join us next time as we explore other EU topics. Thank you for listening.